I find it hard to pin down what makes Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash feel so special to me. It's not a very unique story. The characters can be a bit formulaic at times. It looks gorgeous, but it's not awe-inspiring like the work Ufotable's been pulling off for over a decade now. Overall, there's just something about it. Something in the way it all comes together to create a fantasy story that feels like it stands against everything fantastical about fantasy. Our characters wake up in a dark room, with no recollection of who they are or how they stumbled upon the world of Grimgar. And knowing nothing of who or where they are and with nowhere to go, they have no other option than to enlist as volunteer soldiers. And that's the plot. We just follow a group of adventurers as they try to earn enough to stay fed and with a roof over their heads. And I like how simple that is. There's a certain joy that comes from seeing our ragtag group slowly climb through the ranks. The story is centered around its characters, and I think it's good that they start off a bit flat before being developed upon as the story goes along. The initial feel of the cast is much like the party of a D&D campaign. The characters can be defined by their class and one or two core personality traits. We have the awkward thief, the responsible priest, the cheerful hunter, the caring warrior, the shy mage, and the reckless death knight. Their simple and, to be honest, borderline plain personalities make them very easy to understand early on, which is important as Grimgar throws you into its world and gives you a large cast from the get-go, so if they were these very complex characters, we would either be lost or forced to sit through exposition, and neither sounds like a very pleasant first impression. But don't get me wrong, these characters aren't flat. They're only presented as such before being developed upon quite early on even. During the first episode you might be a bit confused as to where the story will go from there, but that's part of the charm. Just like our cast was thrown into this world head first, so were we. But one thing that helps keep you engaged is just how human, for a lack of a better word, these characters are. They aren't your eccentric anime characters with over-the-top personalities. They could have starred in a down-to-earth slice of life and they wouldn't feel out of place. In a way, everything about the show is very toned down, including how capable they are. Early on, they can barely fight off a single goblin. We get the scene of them falling in the most clumsy and coordinated manner again and again, and these are the little aspects that help humanize them. They don't yet know how to work together. They haven't learned how each other deals with things like pressure, and their inexperience isn't explained through dialogue, but shown through the actual events of the story. There is often this dissonance between what a story tells you to be true and what you see happen. They will call a character inexperienced, but when you see them fight for the first time, it's as if they were war veterans, easily dispatching all foes. And I think this early struggle really helps build the characters up as regular people who took up weapons a few weeks ago. They trip over branches, they hesitate and get scared, and find it hard to apply their training into real situations. And this initial ineptitude only serves to accentuate their growth further down the line as they become more competent. Out of any fantasy story I've watched or read, Grimgar's portrayal of a rookie adventuring party felt the most honest. They struggle to make ends meet. They have to save money as they have no idea if they'll make any the next day. They settle for cheap food, they have to earn their stripes. They don't get to wake up and save the world the next day. And none of this is to invalidate other stories for how they chose to do fantasy. Grimgar just happens to go against most notions that we take for granted. That doesn't make it a better story per se, but it does help to set it apart. As does the world. The world of Grimgar is in no way the largest or most unique in the genre, but what it does very well is make its small world very dense. The repeated use of certain locations lets them be explored in different ways each time, and often helps separate action-heavy moments outside the town from those spent in the tavern or at home. I have this gripe with how world building is often discussed. It's all about what world is vastest, most diverse, most unique, which I think often leads to praising large worlds and overlooking denser ones. World building isn't one size fits all. Different stories require different solutions. Just like the worlds of Mushoku or One Piece take advantage of their large scale to enhance the sense of adventure and wonder, the smaller scope of Grimgar makes everything more personal. Every place has a story. Damara is a city overrun by goblins, a hunting ground for our heroes to start out. But as the party clears up the weaker goblins of the outskirts, stronger ones come from the inner sections of the city to take over the area. It could have just been a ruined city for them to start their adventure and never show up again, but it develops over time, making it feel alive. And this isn't just another tavern. This is the tavern they felt awkward going into at first, the tavern they celebrated after a good day, and the tavern where they went to when they needed noise to drown out their sorrows. Despite its small scale, the world of Grimgar is rich in the depth given to the many recurring locations the story takes place in. Be it the dungeons filled with monsters or the many spots around town they spend their time at, every background is more than a scenery. It's a living place. For a story that glorifies fantasy and adventure, this approach wouldn't really work. The Straw Hats shouldn't be traveling between the same few islands, and Rudius shouldn't just stay in the Boreas estate. But for a story that is focused on normalizing fantasy, as if adventuring was a 9-to-5 of sorts, having these routine locations is key to selling us its own vision of fantasy. And now comes the part where I have to make a warning. Anyone who's watched Grimgar knows the massive spoiler I've avoided so far, so if you have any interest in it and haven't seen it yet, go watch it and then come back to the video. I think this is a moment that is best experienced going in blind, and I say that as someone who generally doesn't mind spoilers. So, during the end of the 4th episode, priest and party leader Manato dies. But it's not a dramatic moment. He doesn't go down swinging or something of that nature. He just got injured. A similar one to those he was healing just a moment ago, but he'd used up all his magic, and since they were far from the town where he could be taken care of, he slowly bleeds out. Grimgar as a story likes to remove the fantasy in fantasy. It treats this world as one would our own. That means that it takes a very indifferent approach to mortality. A lot of stories are dark, where the world is sadistic, almost as if it's trying to get people killed. But the world of Grimgar isn't out to get anyone, it's just indifferent. All throughout the story, death is always looming over them, but it's never an oppressive presence. They know they could die, but it's not to be expected. Most deaths in the story come from a party overreaching or getting in over their heads. Death is never likely if they're careful enough, and this serves to make it much heavier, because whenever someone dies, it was avoidable. And so everyone else is left to regret even the most minor mistakes they made. And what's all the more tragic is that they can't stop to mourn. They live day to day, so while they care about someone's death, the world doesn't. And not only do these characters have to go back to the place they've just lost their friend at, they have to replace him. In this world, a priest is key to a party's survival, and so they have to move on. And that's when we're introduced to Mary. At first, they find it hard to connect, but that's only because she's going through the exact same thing they are. She watched her own party die. She could have helped avoid it if only she were more careful, and yet she has to move on. And I've seen people question the purpose of having these deaths in Grimgar, but I think that's the point. Death is just death. It doesn't have a point, it doesn't have meaning, it's just the end of life. It fits in perfectly with the rest of this almost anti-fantasy world we're presented with. These aren't great heroes, they're soldiers of the volunteer army. They aren't fighting evil itself. Monsters in Grimgar aren't mindless beasts. For both sides, it's a matter of survival. And unlike shows that only pay lip service to this, Grimgar actually follows through and respects monsters as living beings of their own. They get to struggle, to cling to life, to group together and grow from their mistakes. And this all serves to create a certain atmosphere that I think is best described by the title of the show, Fantasy and Ash. The world of Grimgar is beautiful, but it's already burned down. Humans are cursed to become undead if not cremated. They are stuck in a conflict that is unlikely to ever find a resolution. The world is dying, but there's a certain beauty to it. And it was masterfully conveyed by the people behind the adaptation. The faded watercolor makes every still shot into a painting. The colors, the brush strokes, the pencil outlines. It's not even the animation, but the art direction itself. Every decision made regarding the look, sound, and feel of the show contributes to this atmosphere that is so captivating that it balances out how morbid the show can be at times and makes it still beautiful. It looks like a painting in motion, and these visuals, as well as the soundtrack and each and every other detail, is key to selling us this world. What makes Grimgar stand out isn't any singular element, but how everything comes together perfectly. And the best example of this is the last episode. To set the scene, our protagonist Haruhiro is left behind facing the enemy responsible for killing Mary's party. And with all that the story has set up to this point, everything we've been through with these characters, and our notions of how fantasy stories work, we expect a triumphant moment backed by the main theme. But even when he comes out victorious, it's not played up at all. We don't get any epic music, flashy animation, or fought to the end battle. Just like our heroes aren't treated to glorious ends, neither are the monsters they face. Death is just death. It doesn't have a point. It doesn't have a meaning. It's just the end of life. The season doesn't end on this fight and one last hurrah. He isn't celebrated around town or treated as a hero. Instead, it closes on the cast finally accepting the death of their loved ones. They finally understood finality and how death is neither glorious nor tragic. It's just the end. And with how all over the place everything in this video was, I find it hard to figure out how to end it. But maybe the end of this video doesn't need to have a particular message or to tie together all my thoughts on the series. Maybe the end is just the end. Maybe fantasy lied.